Welcome to another episode of the Sparkles of Gold Astrology Manifesto podcast. My name is Nicolas Polymenakos, aka Sparkles of Gold. We have another episode of 3 questions. Tonight I am with
Stormie Grace. Wait, I just love it. Nicolas Polymenakos.
Yeah, Nicolas Polymenakos. Nicolas is kind of, I'm half Ecuadorian and half Greek.
Nicolas
Polymenakos.
Polymenakos.
Very good. It means many crafty.
Sure, right. And you got, yes. Yes, that's fantastic. I always love saying your name. I'm like, this is Nick's here.
Yeah.
So now I've got the full name.
And I appreciate you knowing how to say my name, because the first day of school was always weird. Everybody looked back at me when I say my name and they never get it right. Only the English teachers pronounced it right, you know? So that's a good way to actually start off the podcast. This is an episode of 3 questions. I just want to say for everybody listening who knows me or it's their first time, Stormie doesn't know the 3 questions I'm about to ask.
Okay.
And right now, as I color this, you got this little sparkle in your eye, like, what is he going to say to me?
Yeah.
And so I like this edginess. That's why I do this with astrologers. Okay? So let's start with the first question.
Okay.
Stormie, what's your favorite astrological technique?
My favorite, progressed and natal lunar phasing. Mm-hmm. These are my 2 favorite techniques, mostly because I think they just cut through everything. We start at ground level, get a good sense of what and who we're dealing with in terms of timing and energy that's available, and then you can build from there. So I think those are my favorite.
Over time, I know astrologers, they learn in the beginning phases and they have favorite techniques and things change. How was it for you? Did you start with basically, obviously looking at the natal chart and what it means and the aspects, and then was the next step like then current transits, like a bi-wheel, like looking over? How was it in a sense for you? How do you have a story with it, or
It's not, I don't know if it's a big story, but yeah, absolutely. Of course, I started basic looking at the natal chart and things like that. But in the natal chart work, pretty quickly for me, I started with quadrant and hemisphere work.
Ah, yes.
So that's really where it started for me. So way before, honestly, I was looking at the planets and the aspects. I was looking at what can you see immediately. And those are other things I think that naturally attracted me to using lunar phasing, because you can see it immediately. What's the shape of light? We're using quadrants and hemispheres. What can you see? And then we layer into that.
Yes. Okay, good. Now I feel where you're coming from. And then it's interesting then from there, like how, in a sense, I can't believe I'm using this word, how it's progressed. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, okay. Thanks for answering the first question.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, second question. Stormie, what's the earliest memory that you have with and to astrology?
Man, that is good. So I'm going to have to say the one that sticks out as a good early memory, because it was always floating in there, I can tell you that. But I was 6, 7, right there at the Saturn Square, and my mom took me to a metaphysical fair, because that was her jam. And I saw all the numerology people, all the people, the herbs and spices. And I watched an astrologer doing a chart, and I felt like I had done it 100 times. Oh. Like I just felt like I was recalling what she was doing instead of watching someone do it, And so that's really the standout memory that I have, is I'm like, oh yeah, she's doing whatever. And it wasn't practiced around my house at that time. So it was more like, oh no, I've been here 100 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my first.
So it's kind of like, sometimes whatever age you run into something and it's like a foreign language, like what is going on? But it sounds like you knew the language already in some sort of way, or it just was familiar. So.
Yeah, it really was, and it stayed with me. And I think that's why I say it was always floating in there. And I don't think that I realized it was floating in there, because I've never been afraid to be without astrology in this life. I've never thought, oh gosh, if I stop studying, or oh, if I'm not doing this, I'll lose it. I've never had that thought. I'm like, whatever, it's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'll let you know. I don't know if I said this in the past one podcast, but it happened in phases for me, but there used to be in the grocery store checkout line, they used to have these horoscope scrolls. Yeah. And I used to steal them.
You thief.
Yeah.
Where is your Mercury?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anything that had Castor and Pollux, the constellation, like even as a kid, not knowing, what it is, I was attracted to. No one told me. I didn't even know my birthday or my birth sign, but I've always was, like gravitating, or it was familiar. It was speaking to me.
Yeah.
So
that makes a ton of sense. And look, we're upstanding adults now, even though some of us were thieves.
Yes. And, I will just say here, as Mercury in Gemini, there is that part. That's part of the Hermes story is the what do you call it, leader of thieves, the guide of thieves, besides a bunch of different things.
Absolutely.
That's part of it,
I mean, the whole cow situation was a real situation.
Yeah, again, coming out of the womb and immediately stealing Apollo's cattle, and then being rewarded by being made an Olympian god because of it.
Right, and all these years later, Hermes opens a FedEx in The Legend of Percy Jackson. So if anybody hasn't seen it.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. And it's funny, too, when we look at what's the floral company that uses Hermes as the symbol? One of the other ones. Yeah. Forget
really
which one,
good.
but it's funny. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for answering question number 2.
Yes.
All right. Question number 3. What are you reading these days that is not connected to astrology? Now, I say this every time for people listening, that most astrologers, when I do this, like, everything's connected to astrology, and I know that. But is there anything, like, you're reading that's not, astrological technique or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in the big esoteric sphere, everything's connected. I get that. I understand that question. But yes, I am reading non-written by astrological text. And what I mean by that is the person that I'm reading currently does not practice astrology.
Yeah.
Fair. So my favorite book I'm getting into right now is Nomad Capitalist. And it is by Andrew Henderson, one of my favorite books right now. It's revolutionizing how I look at the world. And he has this whole concept of diversity in the world where he says, you go where you're treated best. That's his whole principle behind his book, how he runs his business, his life. And it's absolutely phenomenal because it's, right on time with the astrology, funny enough, making me question stories and truths that have been given to me my whole life, even on a societal level, which is like, is this really where I'm treated best based on what it is that I want? Right?
Yeah.
And so in it has encouraged me to challenge my life, but it does play back into the astrology too, because we're right here questioning a lot of truths, what has value, what is the resource behind this, but it is a non-astrological text.
Yes, understood. And for those listening, before we did this interview, Stormie just did the Saturday night keynote here at the Northwest Conference. You hear all the people in the background. and she spoke on Jupiter and Taurus and about resources and the way money and stuff, but really about like our value and to shoot for what we're worth in many different ways, so on and so forth. So for what you're saying here, it's very interesting. I like what you said. Sometimes too, I think about the first Saturn return that happens, because a lot of time it's the end of Act 1 into Act 2, and we kind of have to gut check what we were shown or taught from the time we came out of the womb till 27 to 30, and like, what do we keep with us and what do we let go? And a lot of that is like what we're expected to do.
Right?
Yeah, and sometimes it comes along with, like, you're around people that supposedly support you, but it doesn't work that way. It could be family issues, so on and so forth. So if we're speaking to the type of thing like, you go where you're, how did you say it in the book?
Go where you're treated best.
Go where you're treated best. As a lot of times in situations, you think you're waiting to be treated your best by supposedly people are supposed to, right?
Right.
And then you have to figure out the hard way, or you make the breaks, or you go wherever. You figure it out, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think at different times in the world, that phrase might have meant something very different for me than when Uranus is in Taurus and the world is changing.
Yeah.
When there's a Saturn-Pluto conjunction that really got busy changing the world, that question might have meant something different. Mm-hmm. Maybe I just get a new friendship group, or maybe I make sure I have the right job. Now for me, though, in my life, at 41, I'm like, wait, am I living in the right country? Do I like this economic system? These are the kinds of things that I also think age helps with. It can offer some help in answering these questions, because there are some things that just with age, the body changes, the mind changes. So to answer that question just gets different.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. I'll say somebody, you get in the 40s, and that's for people who know astrology, what's coming up is Saturn opposition to Uranus opposition. Sometimes they call that midlife crisis. Basically, start waking up with mortality in your brain every morning, and then I only got so much time.
Yeah.
I got to do this. But it really, the stakes there too is where do I go where I'm accepted or I'm uplifted?
Right.
Because a lot of the times, I noticed this with client work, with myself or whatever, we all have these different versions of imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. We're all trying to chase a dream over what we really want, and sometimes we don't make the moves because we are in fear of what other people might think or what could happen if you do that, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, some of that goes away besides one coming into their power and making a decision, but it also helps when you go somewhere where you are accepted and uplifted, then the choices aren't that hard. You're supported.
Right.
And by the way, I'm going to check that book out.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think, and I know sometimes people can be turned off, especially if you're in a political trigger by the word capitalist.
Yeah.
But capitalist in this sense is about choice. What are you choosing? It's not this place where we're experiencing a lot that is not capitalism. It's just greed.
Right.
It's not, because that's run wild. It's capitalism run wild.
Yeah.
So this is a very different concept. So if you can be open to it, or it's time for you. That's really it, right? We're not reading, watching, or engaging with things that are not in our vibration.
Yeah.
So if it's time for you, this book will probably resonate, and the first 20 pages you'll be like, yes. Oh my gosh. So I invite anybody. But if not, just read The Alchemist. It's very good.
Yeah, no. That's actually, I just published a Gemini Brett episode, and that was a book.
It's my favorite book.
He just read for the first time recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that book's amazing.
That is my number one text. If people ask me what book I think they should read in this lifetime, it would be The Alchemist.
Yeah. Well, you kind of answered the bonus question I was going to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
And if whatever comes up, it doesn't, it's okay. What's a book from the past that changed your world? Like it wasn't just some book. It entered through all your senses and popped them off, and it became a life changer. You know what I mean? It imprinted you. Is there anything you could think about?
Yeah, well, The Alchemist is one of them.
Yes,
yeah, that one was just because I think I was older. I was in my conscious mind. I was in my adult spirit when I read it. So I was past the Saturn return. So I was able to hear and receive that in a different way. So The Alchemist is it. And I want to say, too, I hate reading. So it's The Alchemist via audiobook.
Yeah.
So listening to that changed my world. But honestly, I read a book tonight at our keynote, and it's called I Knew You Could. And that is a book. And I remember reading that book. It's a kid's book. And I read it in school. And that, even from when I was younger, I'm like, this sounds a lot like life.
Yeah, it was beautiful, Stormie.
It's a beautiful book.
For those listening, she ended her lecture tonight with this. And I Knew You Could by
Craig Dorfman.
Yeah, that was Stormie. That was awesome. And thank you for answering the bonus question. And for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun. I want to come back. Do you have 7 more questions?
I could keep going. I do want to paint the picture. We're off the atrium here at the hotel in the closed restaurant in here in a restaurant booth. Just to paint it for all y'all. And oh yeah, we don't want to forget this. You never know who's listening and never known you. How can people find out more about you, Stormie?
Oh yes, come visit me. Come to my website, stormiegrace.com. But you can also follow me on YouTube, or come visit me on YouTube. I have 2 pages. One is all astrology, so that's just Stormie Grace. You can look for that, or you can look up Legati Academy, which is about business and how you build business. And it's fun. Come build a business.
Yeah, totally. Stormie, really good that we connected and we pulled it off. Right?
I know.
And I appreciate you. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.